New York City might be about to drop $1.1 billion to replace police with social workers. But critics warn this new plan is just a dangerous replay of failed policies that puts ideology way ahead of public safety.
It's a massive gamble, and honestly, the stakes could not be higher for anyone walking those streets.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're stripping away all the campaign slogans and looking at the hard numbers behind a topic that is keeping a lot of New Yorkers up at night.
Yeah, definitely.
We are digging into Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani and his very bold, very controversial plan to completely overhaul how the city handles mental health.
That's right. And we've pulled a big stack of reports for this one. We've got analysis from the Manhattan Institute's City Journal, policy breakdowns from Vital City, and the actual campaign platforms themselves.
Because our mission here is to see if the math actually adds up. I mean, on paper, community safety sounds fantastic. Everyone wants community safety.
Right.
But when you look at the data, you start to see some flashing red lights. And we should set the scene for you here. This isn't just some abstract policy paper. This is happening fast. Mamdani won the election, and his top priority is creating this massive new agency called the Department of Community Safety, or the DCS.
Exactly. And the catalyst, the thing that really kicked this whole movement into high gear, was a tragedy. It was the recent police shooting of Jabez Chakraborty. He was a 22-year-old man suffering from schizophrenia. It was a heartbreaking situation all around.
It really was.
But Mamdani is using that moment to push for this idea that we need to route crisis calls to civilians right now instead of cops.
So the core promise is pretty simple. You call 911 because someone is having a severe mental health crisis, and instead of a police officer showing up, a social worker shows up.
Right. But here is the counter-argument that we really need to unpack today. Experts warn that this plan ignores the violent reality of untreated severe mental illness. You are looking at a plan that strips the NYPD of their authority, builds a massive new bureaucracy, and basically relies on voluntary wellness programs for people who are just too sick to even know they need help.
And I was looking at the call volume in that Manhattan Institute report, and it is just staggering. We aren't talking about a few dozen incidents. We are talking about roughly 175,000 emotionally disturbed person calls a year.
Yeah, 175,000. That is the massive scale we are dealing with.
Right.
So the safety of the subways, the streets, and honestly, the social workers themselves totally hangs in the balance here.
Okay, let's unpack this Department of Community Safety. Because whenever I hear new government agency combined with New York City, I immediately grab my wallet.
You definitely should grab your wallet. The proposal is asking for $1.1 billion. Now, to be totally fair, about $455 million of that is new funding, and the rest is money they want to transfer from other agencies. But it is still a massive layout of taxpayer cash.
But here is what I don't get. We've been down this exact road before. I remember the de Blasio years. I remember Thrive NYC. Didn't we already spend $1 billion on this exact same thing?
Yes, that is the comparison everyone is making, and it's impossible to ignore. De Blasio spent about $1 billion on Thrive NYC, and the criticism back then is the exact same criticism surfacing today. Thrive NYC spent a fortune on wellness.
But wellness is such a vague term. What did that actually buy the taxpayers?
Well, according to the critiques, it bought us anti-stigma campaigns. It bought us coping skills training.
Right.
It bought us those really nice posters on the subway telling you it's okay to feel sad.
Which, look, I am all for ending stigma. If I'm stressed out about work, maybe a poster helps. But does a poster help the guy screaming at hallucinations on the F train?
No. And that is the absolute crux of the conservative critique here. Critics like Carolyn Gorman from the Manhattan Institute drill down into where this money actually goes. She argues that this approach throws money at the worried well.
The worried well.
Yeah, people who might have mild anxiety or depression. But it essentially ignores the 5% of New Yorkers who have severe biological brain diseases. We're talking about schizophrenia and bipolar disorder.
So we are effectively taking taxpayer money meant for severe crisis intervention and spending it on, what, lifestyle enhancement.
That is the big fear. Mamdani's plan focuses heavily on peer-led programs, clubhouses, and community navigators. Again, these sound very friendly.
Sure.
But a clubhouse does not treat psychosis. If you look at the track record of Thrive NYC, we didn't see a reduction in homelessness or the revolving door of arrests. We actually saw those numbers go up.
And now we are looking at creating a whole new agency, this DCS, to do basically the exact same thing. It feels like we are just adding another layer of middle management.
It creates what critics are calling a bureaucracy trap. Just think about it. You already have the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. You have the Department of Homeless Services.
Right.
Now you add the Department of Community Safety. You are creating this confusing patchwork of programs where the money just gets eaten up by administration. You have 3 different agencies fighting over jurisdiction, and the actual service delivery gets worse, not better.
It's like adding another highly paid chef to a kitchen that is literally on fire. But let's pivot to the part of this plan that I think scares people the most, the police.
Oh, yeah. This is the third rail.
Mamdani isn't just saying add social workers. He is explicitly pledging to end co-response teams.
Right. So co-response is the current model where the city sends a police officer and a clinician together. It's a safety net. Mamdani wants to end that entirely. He wants civilian-only teams going out for these 911 calls.
But hold on. If I'm playing devil's advocate for a second, isn't the progressive argument that police presence escalates things? That just seeing a uniform and a gun makes a person in crisis freak out? That seems to be their main talking point.
That is absolutely their argument. They claim police bring tension, but we have to look at the harsh safety reality versus the progressive theory. In 2023, out of those 175,000 calls we mentioned, there is a statistic that should make everyone pause.
Okay.
More than 1,700 of those individuals used physical force against the police.
Wait, 1,700? That is almost 5 officers getting attacked every single day by someone in a mental health crisis.
Exactly. So if a person is violent enough to attack an armed police officer who is highly trained in self-defense, what happens when you send in a social worker with a clipboard and good intentions?
That is a terrifying thought. You're basically sending them into a lion's den without a shield.
Brian Stetton, an expert with Vital City, argues strongly that removing police leaves these social workers totally defenseless. He points out that the police aren't there to do therapy. They are there to secure the scene.
Right, to make it safe.
Exactly. Once the scene is safe, the clinician can actually do their job. If you remove the person who secures the scene, you are making a massive gamble that the person in crisis isn't going to be violent.
And is there data on how often they actually are violent? Because I feel like advocates constantly say most people with mental illness aren't violent.
Generally speaking, that is true for the broader population, but we are talking about a very specific subset here. We're talking about untreated, severe mental illness during an active crisis. Look at the subway crime stats. Among the top 10% of people arrested for violent subway crimes, almost 80% had mental health issues.
80%.
Yes. There is a clear correlation between untreated severe mental illness and violence. Ignoring that to fit a political narrative doesn't just make the danger go away.
But Mamdani keeps bringing up this program in Oregon on the campaign trail, the RECOODS program. He says they handle calls without police all the time, and it works out great. Why can't New York just copy that?
This is what experts are calling the Eugene myth.
The Eugene myth. Explain that.
Yes. Eugene, Oregon. Let's look at the demographics for a second. It is a small, relatively homogeneous college town. They have incredibly low violent crime rates. New York City is, well, it's New York City.
Yeah, a slightly different vibe.
Just a bit. But much more importantly, the data Mamdani is citing is highly misleading. He claims Cahoots resolved 20% of police calls without backup.
Okay.
But when you actually dig into the report, Cahoots mostly handled a specific non-emergency helpline. When you look at actual 911 calls, the real emergencies, they only diverted about 3 to 8%.
Oh, wow. So he is taking data from a non-emergency helpline and applying it to New York City 911 calls.
Exactly. It's comparing apples to oranges. Actually, it's comparing apples to a burning building. Applying a model from a sleepy town handling noise complaints to the volume and intensity of New York City 911 calls is, as some critics put it, utter fantasy.
So we have a billion-dollar bureaucracy, and we have the removal of police protection based on distorted data from a college town in Oregon. But I really want to get to the why here. Why do these individuals refuse help so often? If a social worker shows up, can't they just talk the person into getting treatment?
This is where we run into the ideology of the progressive plan versus raw medical reality. Mamdani strongly believes in voluntary treatment. He says involuntary commitment, meaning forcing someone to go to the hospital, should be an absolute last resort.
And again, on the surface, to a normal person, that sounds nice. Nobody wants to force anyone to do anything. We value liberty.
It sounds compassionate until you understand a medical condition called anosognosia.
Anosognosia.
Okay.
That's a mouthful. Break it down for us.
It is a profound neurological deficit. It affects about half of all people living with schizophrenia and severe bipolar disorder. It basically means the physical part of their brain that allows them to have self-awareness is broken.
Wow.
It's not psychological denial. They literally cannot understand that they are sick.
So if you walk up and ask them, hey, do you want help?
They will look at you and say, I'm not sick. You're the one who's crazy. They believe their delusions are completely real. So asking them to volunteer for treatment is quite literally impossible. It's like asking a person with a broken leg to run a marathon to get to the emergency room.
So under Mamdani's plan, if you wait for it to be a last resort, what are you actually waiting for?
You are usually waiting for violence. You are waiting until they push someone onto the subway tracks or hurt themselves. That is the revolving door. They don't get treatment. They decompensate, which is the clinical term for losing their tether to reality. They get arrested, they go to jail, they get released back to the street, and it just starts all over again.
So what is the alternative then? If voluntary programs don't work for this specific severe group because their brains physically will not let them volunteer, what actually works?
The conservative solution, and really the proven clinical solution for this specific population, is something called Kendra's Law.
I've heard of Kendra's Law, but isn't that controversial? Some of the more left-leaning groups say it's just locking people up.
That is a massive misconception. Kendra's Law allows for assisted outpatient treatment, or AOT. It allows courts to mandate treatment for people with a documented history of violence or repeated hospitalization who refuse to stay on their medication. But, and this is key, it is outpatient.
So they aren't in a facility.
Right. It doesn't mean locking them up in an asylum forever. It means a judge says you have to stay in treatment and take your medication if you want to live freely in the community.
Does it actually work, though? Or is it just more government paperwork?
The data on Kendra's Law is overwhelming. It is proven to heavily reduce homelessness, reduce arrests, and significantly reduce violence. It acts as legal leverage to keep people on their medication so they don't spiral into psychosis.
But Mamdani's plan doesn't include this.
No. His plan completely deprioritizes this. In fact, he is very skeptical of civil commitment in general. He wants less court involvement, not more.
Which is the exact opposite of what folks like former Governor Cuomo and conservative critics are saying we need.
Right. They argue we need more psychiatric beds and more court involvement because the current progressive system is just too loose. We are essentially letting people die on the streets with their rights on rather than mandating the medical care that would actually save their lives.
It seems like there's a fundamental disagreement on what compassion actually looks like. Is compassion letting someone do whatever they want, even if they're deeply delusional and freezing on a grate? Or is compassion stepping in and making sure they get medical care?
That is the core philosophical divide here. And right now, the Mamdani plan falls heavily on the side of absolute liberty, even if that liberty leads to utter deterioration and public danger.
I want to zoom in on the logistics of this now, because having a theory is one thing, but how does this actually play out on a Tuesday afternoon in the Bronx? Mamdani wants to take a pilot program called Be Heard and expand it.
Right. Be Heard is the Behavioral Health Emergency Assistance Response Division. It pairs EMTs with social workers for crisis calls.
That just sounds like a co-response team.
It is, but crucially, without the police. It uses EMS instead. The massive problem there is, have you tried to get an ambulance in New York lately?
Oh, they are incredibly busy. I read somewhere that response times are already lagging way behind where they should be.
EMS is already stretched incredibly thin. They are dealing with heart attacks, strokes, major car accidents. Mamdani wants to take this pilot program and expand it citywide, but shifting this to a new civilian agency adds a massive layer of red tape, and it completely ignores the fact that 50% of crisis calls present acute safety risks that require police anyway.
So you are basically taking critical EMS resources away from actual medical emergencies to send them to mental health calls that probably need a cop to show up regardless.
Exactly. It's a logistical nightmare. And it actually gets worse when you look at street outreach for the homeless.
You're right, because this is the most visible part of the crisis for everyday New Yorkers. The people living in encampments on the street.
Currently, street outreach is handled by the Department of Homeless Services, the DHS. They have dedicated teams that go out, build relationships over time, and try to get people into shelters. Mamdani wants his new DCS to completely take over that outreach.
Why does changing the acronym matter? If someone is doing the outreach, isn't that good enough?
It matters heavily because of continuity of care. And this is a really human point that gets totally lost in all this progressive policy talk. Homeless individuals need consistent context. They need to know and trust the person talking to them.
That makes sense.
Trust takes months to build on the street. If you suddenly switch agencies, fire the old teams, or move them and bring in a brand new set of workers from a brand new agency, you break all those fragile relationships. You are starting from zero.
And I've read about some specific teams that are actually working well right now. Scout and Path. These are the teams specifically operating down in the subways, right?
Yes, and this is a crucial point. Scout and Path are highly successful models. They actually team up clinicians with police officers to patrol the subways together. They have been very successful in moving people off the trains and into hospitals because they have the authority, via the police officer, to make things happen when a situation is dangerous or when someone needs immediate transport.
And Mamdani's new plan would do what to them?
It would likely gut them entirely. By pledging to end co-response, he is effectively saying he wants to dismantle the exact teams that are successfully getting the most severe, dangerous cases off the subway tracks. He calls it community safety, but critics argue he is literally removing the safety mechanism that allows the community to function.
It really seems like there's a huge disconnect between this gentle wellness language, the gritty, violent reality of the streets. We're just talking about dismantling things that actually work to build something that historically has just wasted money.
And it all comes back to that money. You are spending $1.1 billion. That money could go to building more psychiatric beds, which we desperately need.
Yeah.
It could go to enforcing Kendra's law. It could go to hiring more prosecutors to deal with violent offenders. Instead, it is going to navigators and clubhouses.
So if you are a conservative looking at this, or just any regular citizen concerned about public safety on your commute, what is the ultimate takeaway here?
The takeaway is that this is an ideology-first plan, not a safety-first plan.
Hmm.
It prioritizes the radical idea that police are inherently bad and civilian wellness is inherently good, but it totally ignores the biological reality of severe mental illness. It assumes that if you just offer someone a nice place to hang out, they will magically stop being schizophrenic, and that's just not how the disease works.
And meanwhile, the police, who are literally the only ones equipped and trained to handle a violent person, are being told to stand down.
Stand down and defund, essentially. By shifting massive resources to this new civilian agency, you are inevitably pulling focus, funding, and authority away from law enforcement. And in a city where violent subway crime is a major issue, where random attacks are a daily fear for people, removing the police from the equation is an unacceptable risk.
It feels like we're conducting a giant sociological experiment on the city.
We are. And the subjects of that experiment are the commuters, the business owners, and honestly, the mentally ill individuals themselves. They need medical treatment. They need a hospital bed. They do not need a wellness brochure.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? If you are walking down the street next year and you see someone in a violent crisis, the system that responds to your 911 call is about to change drastically.
It is. And we all have to ask ourselves if we are ready for the severe consequences of that change. We've seen what happened when New York loosened laws on bail reform. We've seen what happened with the $1 billion wasted on Thrive NYC. This looks like the exact same playbook, but with much higher stakes and a bigger price tag.
It's a sobering look at what is coming down the pipe for New York City. We've covered the money, the defunding of police, the medical realities of anosognosia, and the logistical nightmares. It is really not a pretty picture.
No, it is not. And I think the biggest tragedy here is that by trying to be hyper-progressive, the city is going to end up hurting the very people it claims it wants to help. Leaving someone to decompose on the street in the name of civil liberties isn't progress. It is pure neglect.
That is a very powerful way to put it. Before we wrap up today, I want to leave you with one final thought. We talk a lot about the policy, the bureaucracy, and the billions of dollars. But think about the human element on the front lines for a second.
Right.
If we remove the police from the equation just to satisfy a political ideology, who exactly are we asking to step in front of a violent, unpredictable crisis? And are we prepared for the tragedy that is absolutely going to happen when an unarmed, defenseless social worker is sent to do a cop's job?
That is the question every single New Yorker needs to be asking Mayor-elect Mamdani right now.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. We will catch you on the next one. Stay safe out there.